he gave a speech at the United Nations where he spoke about a number of issues, and in passing he mentioned taking credit for ending a lot of conflicts, including a reference to India and Pakistan. I think India has been very clear on that front and said that the cessation of hostilities that occurred on May 10th were a consequence of India's own military actions. And I think my understanding is Prime Minister Modi has made that quite clear to President Trump. Today we heard from US President Donald Trump. He gave a speech at the United Nations where he spoke about a number of issues, and in passing he mentioned taking credit for ending a lot of conflicts, including a reference to India and Pakistan. I think India has been very clear on that front and said that the cessation of hostilities that occurred on May 10th were a consequence of India's own military actions. And I think my understanding is Prime Minister Modi has made that quite clear to President Trump. But he has reiterated that. So I think that has been part of an ongoing conversation.
So Trump in his UN address also mentioned about Russia-Ukraine war, where he said that China and India are the biggest funder of the war. How do you see such a statement?
Again, I think India has been very clear on that front. Prime Minister Modi has been one of the most vocal in calling for an end to the conflict, including in earlier meetings with President Putin. He's visited Ukraine, met with President Zelensky. And I think India has also given the case for why it has continued to purchase oil from a variety of sources, including from Russia, that in fact that has helped to stabilize global oil prices, and that India is ultimately responsible for the energy security of its own country. So I think India has made it quite clear as to its own rationale and logic. It reinforces the fact that prior to the war, a very small amount of its oil was coming from Russia. But again, this has been a claim that has been, or a logic that has been reiterated by Trump on a number of occasions.
So where do you see India-US relationship going forward, especially when it comes to trade? The Commerce Minister is also in US and also the Foreign Affairs Minister. Mm-hmm. How do you see the relationship going forward in that sector?
Well, I think the good news is that there's been a resumption of dialogue at the highest levels. Yesterday, Piyush Goyal, who's the Minister of Commerce and Industry, met with the U.S. Trade Representative. There is now a sort of re-establishment of that high-level dialogue. You also have working-level conversations, including a U.S. trade delegation that last week visited India. So I think they're working. In fact, I think Secretary of State Rubio said today that they're hoping to find some solution quite soon. So they're working on it. But I think from India's point of view, there is a very clear understanding that the 50% tariff is a very high, unusually high tariff rate, and that particularly the 25% extra tariff that the Trump administration has imposed for the purchase of Russian oil needs to be brought down. And that it is having consequences for bilateral trade and also for the broader environment. So I think that is a step. Whether that happens at one go, whether a broader trade agreement can be reached, or whether it is a step-by-step de-escalation on the trade side remains to be seen. But I think there is the fact that both sides are working towards that is now a positive after about 2 months of a very frigid relationship at the top levels between the US and India.
So just last question, President Trump recently announced visa hike on H-1B visa, new proclamation. How do you see that going forward, especially when most of them, 60 to 70% H-1B professionals are Indians who are contributing to American society?
So the H-1B visa program is important. There are about almost 5 lakh Indians who are affected in some way, directly or indirectly, by any changes to the H-1B program. I think a few things. One, I think India is conscious of the fact that for any country, their immigration regime tends to be a sovereign matter, including India's. And so, and in that sense, it's really up to every government to design their own visa policies. That's really up to those governments. A few considerations, however. One, I think industry has raised some concerns about whether it is able to get sufficient talent for jobs, including Indian-based MNCs, but also US-based companies as well. So that is one concern, but that's largely a business matter rather than a government-to-government matter. The second issue is that the government has raised was the potential humanitarian consequences for separation of families, for H-1B visa holders who are abroad, when there were concerns a few days ago that such people would not be allowed to enter into the country absent a $100,000 fee. Fortunately, the White House clarified that that was not the case, that existing H-1B visa holders would not be affected, and that these new rules would apply for more long-term from next year for the visa lottery. One last, I think, consideration is that the U.S. remained, until recently, I mean, this was before Operation Sindoor, the negative opinion of the US and India was actually quite low. In one survey conducted earlier this year, it was only 19% of Indians expressed a negative view of India, which is amongst the lowest in the world. I think Israel only, and amongst a few other countries, is lower. And a big reason for that was, I think, this idea that the US was an attractive place for education and employment. Now, it is unclear whether in the long term, if more and more conditions and restrictions are placed, whether that will change over time. Now, that's obviously not something weighing on the Trump administration's mind, but something to consider.